You're listening to the Conversations with KidsPeace podcast. Advice, information, and inspiration from experts at the leading provider of mental and behavioral health services for children, adults, and those who love them. Now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to our podcast series, Conversations with KidsPeace. I'm Bob Martin. This is our second episode marking Foster Care Month in May, but it's the first time we've taken the podcast on location. We're at the KidsPeace Foster Care offices in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, to talk about one of the most heartbreaking and least understood aspects of the nationwide epidemic of opioid addiction, caring for infants born to mothers who used opioids during their pregnancy. The staff and foster parents here in the Doylestown office are tackling this problem with new trainings and information sharing. And to discuss that today, we're joined by Megan Craig, a foster parent here in the Bucks County area, and Heather Moore, Pennsylvania Eastern Regional Manager for KidsPeace Foster Care and Community Programs. Thanks to both of you for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having us.
Welcome.
Megan, let me start with you. First off, a little bit of background. How did you and your husband decide to become foster parents?
You know, ultimately, my husband and I felt really compelled to just help children. I'm a former elementary school teacher, and I had students in my classroom who were in foster care. And I just really remember sitting down and quizzing her foster mom one day, just kind of the last few years before I left for my maternity leave. So foster care was always on our radar. And then just one day we decided to go for it as a family. We contacted KidsPeace, and then, of course, leaving out a ton of details, the rest is history. We have two young biological daughters, so all four of us have actually said at some point in our journey that doing foster care was actually the best decision that each of us have made as a family. Certainly not the easiest, but was the most impactful.
Well, I think everybody really admires people who take on the challenge of foster parenting. And now, specifically, though, how did you become involved with fostering opioid-impacted infants, babies?
Well, you know, we just sort of fell into that. I guess we just chose to do foster care to help children. You know, they are in situations that are beyond their control, and we wanted to be somebody that could help them for the short time. But I guess we never really realized what those situations were. And actually, every single call that we have received has been a child or an infant that has been touched somehow by drug addiction. So we were very naive to the fact of how prevalent drug addiction is, and specifically in just our backyard.
Well, certainly we're finding out that foster care is one of those, I guess the cliche is canaries in the coal mine, that people have become cognizant of what's happening with the opioid epidemic, in part because you see the initial sort of impact is coming to public eye through things like foster care and the challenges that foster parents are dealing with. Can you give us an insight into, when you're talking about a child who's been touched by addiction, what are the first few days of caring for them like for your family?
Well, the first few days are a little hectic. It's a lot of trial and error. We basically try to clear our schedule as much best we can for the first 24 to 48 hours, which is sometimes hard because you get a call in the middle of the night and you may have something planned for the next day. But it's exciting and it's new, but it's also a little scary, full of a lot of unknowns. I actually typically don't even sleep at all the first night. Just so many new things, new sounds. You know, are they snoring? Is that normal, or is that a problem? So we best just try to, figure out all of the issues up front. For infants, it's a lot of trying to find their routine. So I do a lot of documenting of how much they eat, how often they eat, when they sleep, where they like to sleep, how they like to sleep. You know, some infants really need to be swaddled really tight. Some don't like to be swaddled at all. Some like to be half swaddled. Some like a crib. Some are used to sleeping in a swing or a pack and play or rock and play or whatever. Lights on, lights off. I mean, it's really, truly just trying to figure it all out. And then, once you get to the basics of that, we also have the concerns that haven't been disclosed to us or haven't yet been identified. So we try as early as possible to see a doctor. We try to, document everything. One little child had a lot of weird tics with her hands when she would, reach out. So we would document anything that just seemed mildly unusual. It's actually very shocking to us as experienced parents of 2 children, but it's very shocking to us how busy bringing home a new infant into our home from childcare actually is compared to bringing, a newborn home as new parents. Just so many things that have to be figured out and moderately quickly that, we didn't necessarily have with our own biological newborn. We knew everything with our newborn, and we don't know anything with the children we get oftentimes.
It must have been very frustrating, that lack of information for you, looking at that. I can hear that in your voice. It's like it must have been just that uncertainty was disconcerting.
Absolutely. But I think it's par for the course with foster care. Foster parents, sometimes we say we're glorified babysitters. We aren't really privy to a lot of details, especially of the biological parents, and rightly so. I mean, we need to respect their privacy as well. But we are caring for these infants, and, some of the information actually could be very helpful to us. What was the pregnancy like? What was the delivery like? Things like that for us, since we're specifically caring for infants, we often certainly don't know right away, maybe as time goes on. I think honestly, though, one of the biggest frustrations is not necessarily a lack of resources, because we've developed, my family and I've developed, through the years with placements and our own children, we have a great list of physical therapists and, occupational therapy specialists. And we have resources like Heather at KidsPeace and other, our caseworkers, we have people now. It's more of like, we just don't know what to ask. Not being touched by addiction personally in my family, I don't know what to look for oftentimes, certainly learn with each case and talking to people, but, just sort of the unknown and not knowing what to look for is frustrating.
And you mentioned there, can you give me an example of something that you may have learned by comparing notes with other foster parents, trying to get through this fog and through this sort of void of information?
Sure. I actually love meeting other foster parents. I find them just so inspiring and just a complete wealth of information. There are absolutely no 2 cases that are alike. But it's just so neat to talk to another foster parent, new or experienced, because everybody has their own information to share. And then I can, sort of put it in my library and pull it when I need to. Simple things from, how did you discipline a child that, has RAD or something like that, all the way to, what'd you get the biological parents for Christmas? So I have a perfect example, though, of another couple here at KidsPeace. We were connected through the director when I wanted to find more information out, and I had called her, and she invited my family over for dinner, which was really nice, before we had signed up for foster care. And she was so great. She reminded us that, we are foster parents. We are just a temporary stop for these children. And despite that need and downright complete unavoidable outcome of getting attached to a child, it is our job to support the biological family. And, this changed us. That piece of advice completely changed us from the very beginning. And I am absolutely, completely grateful for KidsPeace connecting us and for her sharing that honesty with us, because you do get attached immediately. You fall in love, and you absolutely should, because the kids need that. But, the flip side of that is their family needs it. And oftentimes the agency and the foster family are the only positive influences that biological family has. And so for foster care to be successful, you need to remember that relationship.
It's funny, when we talk to foster parents, they say that all the time, is like, you have to be prepared for that separation, and you have to be prepared that that's how that things have worked, because you've had that. On that same sort of note, can you give me some thoughts about how the children that you've cared for, how you feel that they've benefited through their time in foster care with you? You've mentioned that in some cases there might be the only positive experience, the only positive influence that they've had. And I'm just wondering if there's some specifics as to where you think they've benefited.
Well, I'd like to say that each child that we've cared for, whether it be for a weekend or for a year, I hope that we can say that they've benefited from stability and kind of a sense of normalcy during really a very unstable time back at home. Some of our placements, we've actually had larger life benefits, if you will. We've gotten some intense medical care, or we've reached out to early intervention and gotten them some services there. And then ultimately, I think, the children have just been loved in a tough time. My daughters are exceptional big foster sisters, and they bring a lot of fun and laughter to these kids, which, gives these kids a chance to just be kids. Oftentimes, in their home environment, they don't always feel just the stress-freeness of being a kid. So it's obvious, when bonds have been formed in such a short amount of time, and it's obvious that it's very mutual for everybody.
Looking ahead, what's your biggest fear for children who are touched by addiction as they go forward? What, from your perspective, what are you most afraid of?
Yeah, that's a really tough question, actually. I know all parents have fears. I think that my fears for my biological children are a lot more innocent, though, by comparison. So I guess that for all of our past and future foster kids, I think that my biggest fear might be safety. That a relapse doesn't occur with that child around, or unintentional neglect of that child. But of course, as our infants get older, my fears might change for them. Like, I hope that they know that they're loved and that they're valued. I wish that they could grow up in a stable home, things like that it's fearful for me. But it's also really hard to dwell on those fears, quite honestly. Being in foster care, it's just so unpredictable, and addiction is just so difficult to overcome. I don't know. I think as a foster parent, you really need to try to focus on what we can do, and then just keep our door open in case we're needed again.
Oh, we really appreciate that. Heather, let me turn to you. We talk about this issue of the children who are born impacted by opioid use by their mother. First of all, can you give us a sense of how prevalent that problem is?
And I would say in the last 2 years, it's become huge. I mean, we're getting 2 kids in the next 2 weeks who are touched by addiction. Very rarely now do we get a kid that hasn't been touched by addiction. I think the addiction is so prevalent everywhere and is touching every socioeconomic background that it's just impacting the foster care system in a way that we weren't prepared for. The other piece to it is that the kids are coming with a lot of needs that we're just not aware of. Like Megan said, we get a referral and we get information that the county knows, but I've always said these kids are like unraveling onions, and every time the foster parent goes to a doctor's appointment, there's a new medical issue that comes up, or there's a new delay that's seen, and it takes us a good year to get all those needs attended to because they're just not seen at birth.
Now, you've obviously, from your answer there, it's clear that you've had a lot of chance to look into these things and done a lot of research. You are preparing to conduct training on this subject for foster parents and for healthcare workers. So first, let's make sure to share the information about the sessions that are coming up.
Sure. We're having 2 sessions. One is June 12th and one is June 19th. They're being held at the Bucks County Audubon Society in New Hope, Pennsylvania. We're delving into a couple of different topics in regards to that training. We're talking about, what's involved in opioid addiction and how can one identify the risk factors. There's not a lot known about from the common public about addiction, so understanding that piece of it is key to start with. And then how are babies assessed for neonatal abstinence syndrome, and what will foster parents see so that they're prepared for that, and like Megan said, can kind of know what to track and know what to look for. And then finding out what techniques foster parents have found useful, and insights from the research that we've done as to what's out there and what's known about neonatal abstinence syndrome and the best treatment for the children.
Overall, what are you hoping to accomplish with this effort?
I'm really hoping to make it something that is more well known. And I think a lot of the legislation and a lot of the dollars are being put towards addiction, which is really important. But I think the kids that are impacted aren't as well focused and aren't on the forefront of everyone's mind. And hoping to start educating people and making it a conversation so that people are starting to focus on the innocent victims to this, addiction.
How are you approaching putting this training together, gathering all that information?
It's interesting. When we applied for the grant, I thought, oh, we'll just gather all the relevant research and it'll be really easy to kind of put together a training. And what we learned is there's not a lot of research out there, that we really had to go back. And there's a lot of old research that we use, but there's not a lot of relevant research. There's also not a lot of information about appropriate treatment. So the kids are really experiencing withdrawal when they come out of the hospital. So they're experiencing the same withdrawal that an adult would experience. So they have a lot of the same symptoms, but they're not recognized as that by doctors yet, because doctors aren't prepared for that piece of it. So really just educating. We interviewed professionals who are working with this population and got a lot of really good anecdotal information of things that have been helpful. And we also interviewed foster parents to see what their experience is. But there's not a lot out there, and I think there needs to be a lot more research done, because this is a huge population that is going to get older and need a lot of support.
Has there been anything that you've come across in the research that you would say like really surprised you?
I think just there's not a lot known. That, we don't know what the long-term impact is going to be. We don't know what we need to be prepared for. So when, the kids are born, we can address the medical pieces, but we don't know what the long-term impact has been. What we've seen anecdotally is with really good treatment and really early treatment, the kids are thriving. And a lot of the issues they come into care with are resolved within the first year. So that is really hopeful, and hoping to get that across in our training to really be the one that documents things, taking it to the doctor, because the earlier the treatment, the better off the child is in the long run.
That's a little bit of a bright spot.
It is definitely a bright spot.
And we want to mention that information about the trainings will be on our website, fostercare.com, on the Doylestown, Pennsylvania page. And you'll have information about what we're going to cover, as Heather has just said, as well as a link to register. The trainings are free, but advanced registration is required. So you can go on our website and check that out. Now, talking just a little bit in a broader term, as you're dealing with folks who are thinking about becoming foster parents, are they aware of the impact that you've mentioned about the opioid epidemic when it comes to foster care?
I really don't think so. I don't think it's hit mainstream America well enough yet. It was interesting. Megan and I had a conversation, and I have two adopted sons who are 19 and 18, both impacted by opioids. And she had mentioned, a symptom that one of her foster children was experiencing. And I was like, oh, my son has the same issue. It's from the opioid exposure. And not having that realization that could have been a connection, and what simply looks like a medical issue is really something coming from that exposure. So I think foster parents don't have that experience of what is impacting of the addiction, as well as what the biological parents are going through as far as dealing with their addiction and what their challenges are as well.
What do you think the long-term effect of the situation we have in opioids now will be on foster care in general?
I'm hoping that foster care can be the safe haven for these kids, so that they can get the medical treatment that they need. They can get the support that they need. We can also support their biological parents. And that, if possible, they can return home. And if not, then we can find, foster families that will commit long-term to whatever needs the child experiences throughout their lifetime.
Well, again, we really want to thank both of you for being here. On our podcast, we end each of our interviews by asking our guest for a life hack. This can be just a piece of advice or a tip on how to do some task better, or maybe the little bit of inspiration that helps you just get through the day. So, Heather, let me ask you, what's your best life hack?
I think the thing I've learned most, and I actually had a colleague email me this morning struggling with her adopted son, who was also touched by addiction, is look for support wherever you can. It can be, another foster family. It can be your child's teacher who deals with them every day. It can be the aide in the classroom. It can be someone from church. Really looking at the whole it takes a village to raise a child, and looking at what your village is, because I think people would be surprised at who's going to be there for you and who can support your child with you in the long term.
It's one of those situations where you might feel you're alone and you're facing something no one else has faced, and just the knowledge that you've got somebody who's got your back can go a long way.
Exactly, and I think we don't reach out enough to people, and as soon as you start reaching out, people are right there with you. And I've had a lot of people walk this journey with me, and that's why I came to KidsPeace, was to help our foster parents through their journeys.
Megan, to you, what's your best life hack?
Oh boy. All right. Well, so, foster care and life can be full of a lot of anxiety or difficult situations. So I find myself, sitting in the dentist chair or applying for a job or anticipating a court date or something. I find myself saying, in the next hour or this time next week or next year, this is going to be different, or I'm going to know the outcome. And it just helps me to, project what's going to happen and how there's going to be a bright side someday. Also, my second hack.
Oh, you're going to have two for us.
I got
Excellent.
two for you. This one might be even more practical. If you're eating a cupcake, take the bottom part of the cupcake off, put it on top so you have the icing in the middle like a sandwich, and you get icing on both sides of the cupcake.
There you go. There you go. Megan Craig is a foster parent working with the KidsPeace Foster Care office here in Doylestown. Heather Moore is Pennsylvania Eastern Regional Manager for KidsPeace Foster Care and Community Programs. Again, thank you both for sharing and joining us today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us and listening. We look forward to having you join us again for more Conversations with KidsPeace. Take care. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions about our Conversations podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Go to www.kidspeace.org to learn more about the series and share your thoughts.